Nothing says I have fully planned my content like getting to the end of the recording process, thinking you are done, and then finding out you never filmed an intro. So, hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm being bitten. We have roadworks outside, the bin men have just turned up, and the washing machine is going on. Because I didn't think I'd be filming today. Pride and Prejudice is one of my favourite books of all time. I have reread it multiple times, I have watched the films, the TV series, every spin-off there is, and I adore it. I adore the plot of this. I always find something new and interesting to focus on when I read it, and I just adore it. I just adore it. I know that a lot of people think that Jane Austen is overrated when it comes to Pride and Prejudice, and it's not their favourite. It's not my favourite Jane Austen book, but it is one of my favourite books of all time. And that comes out most when it comes to my book buying. I have a habit of buying Pride and Prejudice retellings and then just not reading them. So I thought in the lead up to Jane Austen July, I would work my way through those retellings, let you know what I liked about them, what I didn't like about them, and if you really like Jane Austen and specifically Pride and Prejudice, recommend you the books that are actually good retellings or spin-offs versus the ones that are awful. I will say, because like I said, I'm filming this at the very end of the process, some of these books are bad. Some of these books are just bad, won't be recommending, and some of these books are actually so much better than I ever could have hoped for. But I'm just going to do a quick run through as to how this is going to work. I am going to be filming this in at least 2 parts because I plan on doing essentially a reread of Pride and Prejudice to just remind myself why I love it so much. I did then read all of the traditional and historical retellings, and then I'll be reading all the modern retellings separately for a separate part of the vlog. But men have turned up, you can tell because of the flashing lights. So the first one on my list is The Heiress by Molly Greeley. This follows Anne de Bourgh. Catherine de Bourgh is kind of the old lady who has the biggest mansion, etc., and has a lot of power. Anne de Bourgh is her daughter, and Anne de Bourgh is originally betrothed to Mr. Darcy and has been since they were children, which would create a whole controversy if he were to marry someone else. Wouldn't that be unfortunate? This follows the story of Anne de Bourgh, I think after Mr. Darcy has married Lizzie. So really intrigued by that one. I'm going to be saving this one till last because it is one of the shorter ones, and I think by the time I get to the end of this vlog, I'm going to have lost the will to live. So I always do this. I always set myself up with like a massive vlog idea and then don't want to commit to it because it actually takes forethought to really engage with something over and over again. So this one I'll be saving till last, but I'm kind of intrigued by. I haven't seen anyone else really talk about it. Another one that I have is Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. This is by Jane Austen and Seth Grahame-Smith. This is essentially verbatim Pride and Prejudice, except there are zombies in it. There is a film that has, what's her face, Lily James in it, which I have seen before but not for a while, and I don't know how closely the book and the film correlate, but I'm pretty sure the book and the original correlate closer. So intrigued, and again it's just a little bit different, but because it's technically set in the historical Britain, that's why I'm including it in this one. Then I've got Death Comes to Pemberley. This is by P.D. James. P.D. James was a very prolific crime writer and has written many historical crime dramas, and I loved the TV series of this. This is a sequel rather than a spin-off. This happens essentially after Pride and Prejudice. Mr. and Mr. Darcy are living very nicely together until someone is murdered on their grounds, and they are kind of caught up in the murder mystery element of it and become super sleuths. It's influenced more by the era and history than by the mystery, and because that rhymes, it was very difficult to say. Next, I have Longbourn by Jo Baker. This is actually moving along in tandem with Pride and Prejudice, but it is from the perspective of the servants, and it essentially follows a young girl called Sarah, who is one of the servants in Longbourn, which is where Lizzie Bennet and her family live. But when another servant joins, it causes a bit of a ruckus, but it's also about her story throughout Pride and Prejudice. This was gifted to me by my friend Yanka. I have read this before, but I don't remember finishing it. I don't remember how it ended. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. And then finally, The Other Bennet Sister. This is one of the ones where I had really low expectations for this, mainly because of how chunky it is. I was also disappointed because I don't know if you can see that, but my cat spilt coffee all over this copy. And having read it and loved it, spoiler alert, devastated, and I'm really tempted to get myself another copy just so I can have it all pristine and lovely. It will be a complete waste of money because I probably won't ever read it again, but I do feel like I'm going to be recommending this book a lot this year. I really enjoyed this one. And then for the modern retellings, the most obvious one is Pride by Ibi Zoboi. This is a BIPOC retelling of Pride and Prejudice. This again is a far more modern one and looks at Afro-Latino roots. It's set in Bushwick, so it's Americanized rather than in the UK. And it's one of the ones that I see come up the most when people talk about really good retellings of Pride and Prejudice. So I'm really hyped for this. I don't know if you can tell, but I've read a lot of the historical ones, not all of them. I haven't read any of the modern ones yet as of filming this bit, because this is where I'm editing the historical bit before I move on to the modern bit. So it could have been worse. It could have been worse. Then I have Pride and Prejudice and Other Flavours by Sonali Dev, and the sequel, which is A Recipe for Persuasion. This is a persuasion retelling with a Pride and Prejudice retelling start, and I believe this is a romance series, but I've actively tried to avoid any spoilers for the modern ones because I think it can give away some of the stuff. Like, the idea of like a historical retelling I quite like because I feel like they're quite true to the original text, whereas with modern ones they can do so much with it because we've got a completely different context. And again, it's another BIPOC author, which I thought would be super important. And then I also have Pride and Premeditation and Sense and Second Degree Murder, which is a Sense and Sensibility retelling, which is by Tertia Price. These again are modern retellings, but rather than Darcy and Lizzie being rivals because they're in like the same kind of aristocracy status, in this one he is a lawyer who I think is prosecuting someone she is trying to defend for murder, or something like that. Certainly in Pride and Premeditation. I don't know about Sense and Second Degree Murder. I also don't know if the characters are going to continue over, so that would be quite interesting to see. But yes, really hyped for these ones, and these are so pretty. These are so pretty. So yes, really excited for that. So when you skip to the next clip, it will be when I'm in Newcastle reading Pride and Prejudice, or rereading it because I had a long drive up. And essentially from here, the blog should be more chronological. For that, I can only apologise that this is such a messy start. But I think the general gist is I love Pride and Prejudice. If you're not a fan of Pride and Prejudice, this is probably not the vlog for you, but I did travel quite a bit at the start of this year. There are some really cute B-roll clips if you do want to check it out. But other than that, I'm not going to waste any more of your time. I'm just going to go straight into my thoughts about these books. So I'll catch up with you in a bit. Okay, so it is Saturday morning. It is 6:30 in the morning and I need to dry my hair. I've got up super early because I'm heading to York today to see Becca and Abby, and I'm really excited about it. Hung out with Jamie yesterday and had a really nice dinner, and I managed to read about 300 pages or 250 pages. I managed to read 250 pages of Pride and Prejudice. Now, I'm not going to go super into detail because I managed to drive all the way to Newcastle without my phone charger. My phone charger currently only has 40% and it is dropping, and I need it until I'm ready to go, because the only charger I now have is the one that fits into my car. I don't actually have one to charge it in the room, and it is making me a little bit anxious, so I'm not going to go into this too much, but I just kind of wanted to like clarify some things. So I am a real also, this is this room is really dark. Really dark, and I did think about doing it in here, but there are mirrors like either side of this little gap, and I will do like a little tour of the room in a sec, but there are mirrors like either side, so no matter where I look you can see like the back of my head, and it just felt really weird. So this is the only decent light in here, and thus I'm going to use this for this really super awkward let me lie down angle. Anyway, I wrote an entire essay during my masters about how Pride and Prejudice is not opposites attract. Okay, I think opposites attract is bullshit. I think even as a trope, it is a marketing ploy to sell you books where you believe the idea that someone can be the complete opposite of you, can have the complete opposing opinions of you, and still fall in love with you. That you are lovable enough, that even if someone hates every opinion you've ever had, they're still gonna like you. And it's very clever. It's not true. And I don't mean that just as in a I'm not a romantic kind of way, but I just think it means that when people find enemies to lovers romances, they can like really lean into them, sometimes misconstrued the whole opposites attract type thing. What I love so much about this is there is so much that's kind of embedded very early on when Elizabeth and Darcy first meet.
Elizabeth is very clearly in her comfort zone. She's in her hometown, she's at a function full of people that she knows, and she's very lively. She talks to everyone and she has like a really great time. Darcy is not comfortable. He knows exactly 4 people, and because of that he finds that really uncomfortable and he acts really rude, and even he admits that like his behaviour was not good, because like later on they have the conversation over the piano where she basically says, well, practice talking to people you don't know. And we see him do that. We see him learning from her when he starts talking to her family and when he starts introducing himself to people, etc. There's like, for example, when she then goes to Hertfordshire, when she goes down to Kent, she is uncomfortable. She doesn't really know how to talk to people. She does her best to, but he's far more comfortable, and she can kind of see him being far more lively, and that kind of ingratiates him to her even before he sends her the letter. So neither of them are bad people. They're just uncomfortable. They're socially awkward little beats. And I kind of love that. I love that for this romance in particular. It's why Pride and Prejudice is one of my favourite romances of all time. So I really, really like that. But I do think things like that get misconstrued. I think sometimes people see 2 people with opposing opinions and either see it as tension that's going to create like a really interesting dynamic, or they assume that they obviously have nothing in common. But these 2 have a lot in common. Both of them, their priorities are their family. Like, first and foremost, I mean, I don't know if you've ever had an argument with someone where you're like, I despise the way you talk about people, but then you find out you have like your moral values and your belief system in comparison, and you're like, oh, I guess you're not the worst person on the planet. That's essentially what they're doing. They're not opposites. They have differing opinions, but actually their mannerisms are very similar. And when they have their first arguments, or even first disputes, the one that Bingley shuts down when she goes to visit because her sister's sick, she makes a joke that he just wants to hate everyone upon meeting them. And he makes a joke that she just wants to willfully misunderstand people. And it's really interesting because she has spent almost the entire first part of that book just gossiping about people and making opinions about them, and like her family has called her on it, and like obviously Jane is always just kind of like, you should be nicer to people, because Jane's adorable, and even her aunt is just like, you know, you've got to be careful. I think it's Charlotte Lucas that basically tells her like not to sound bitter, but I think it's her aunt. And that's really interesting because he has been doing the same. He's been kind of judging people. And so she has the prejudice, he has the pride, but actually she's quite prideful too. Like when her feelings are hurt, she takes that personally. And I really like that when she reads the letter, she acknowledges that actually if it weren't for the fact that Wickham, the villain of the piece, was really nice to her and really flattered her and made her feel beautiful, made her feel special, she wouldn't have liked him as much, because actually what he said and did not match up. So he would talk about how family was really important and he would never betray his godfather who passed away, and then he would like routinely slag off the Darcys, and he only mentioned the Darcys after the Darcys had left. So there were things where she was like, no, I don't believe this man. Like he's chatting absolute rubbish. So that in itself was really interesting. Love that. So like stuff like that, I find it really fun that there is this dynamic that A, has lasted forever, but B, I'm going to be really interested when it comes to reading the retellings to see, are they able to pinpoint those things? Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be those things, right? Those are the things for me that shows that this is not opposites attract, that it is not just enemies to lovers, that it is not just a really two-dimensional dynamic between 2 people who have had very different upbringings but have the same moral values, and whether that's just of the time or of the people specifically is down to the reader, right? Because we're all going to pick up themes differently, we're all going to read things differently. There is no right or wrong way to read this, no matter how fucking obstinate I sound, because I love this book so much. I will become an arsehole when people start talking about it. This is my Joker, and it always has been. So it'll be really interesting to see with the retellings whether they pinpoint those things that I like, because that will very much make a difference in how I rank them and how their ratings are affected. Because I can read a modern retelling, and if it gets those characters down to a T, like I've read fan fiction that's like modernized of this. I mean, even like the Lizzie Chronicles that are on YouTube, where they get that they are not at opposing odds. They don't hate each other for any legitimate reason other than their opinions of them are slighted, right? So once that's over, once they actually have conversation, I mean, like, he's in love with her. He knows that she's the woman for him, and he then it's a process of changing his behavior to be worthy of her, which, my God, can we bring that back as a trope? Can we bring that back as a romance trope? Of men working harder to be worthy of women. So yeah, anyway, considering this is meant to be a short clip, it's now nearly 10 minutes, so I will cut down as much of that gumph as I can to make it more succinct. I'm going to finish drying my hair, because there's no way I'm going out into northern winter with wet hair. That would be silly. I would die of a cold. But the sun is starting to rise, so that's quite cool. And then I want to go meet Jamie. I'm very excited to see Jamie again. Had dinner with Jamie yesterday. That was really fun. We talked a lot. I talked a lot. I talked at them a lot. But Jamie and Glenn held their own, and I appreciate that. But yeah, I'm really excited to see Becca and Abby today. It's going to be really fun. I will try and get lots of vloggy clips. But I promise nothing, because to be honest, yesterday I vlogged absolutely nothing, because I just got so excited to see Jamie. That was it. But once I have finished, I will probably finish this back when I'm in Banbury, because the drive down is about 5 hours, and I've only got 2 hours left, and I don't necessarily want to have to like stop to swap over an audiobook if I can help it. So what I might do is put on a shorter audiobook, stop at the services, and then when I stop at petrol, finish the rest of it. But regardless, even if I just finish it back in Banbury, which is also a possibility, I will kind of give you my final thoughts on this. And I know it's going to be a 5 stars because it's so beautifully written, and I just love it so much. And also, I've had this copy forever, so I'm really excited to finally take this off my TBR as another little TBR challenge bit, so that's fun. But yeah, I'm gonna go get ready. I'm gonna go put something on this to make it look, I mean, my skin looks great, but she's got smiles under her eyes. She's that tired. I did not sleep well. I was so excited to see everyone today, but also terrified that my phone would die during the night and my alarm would not go off. That I did not sleep great. I will sleep much better tonight, but I'm gonna go hang out with my friends, and I'm really excited about it. Absolutely making the most of this super misty background to talk about the first adaptation I'll be reading after reading Pride and Prejudice. Now, I adore Pride and Prejudice. I have watched the TV series of Death Comes to Pemberley. So just a quick recap of what this is about. Essentially, everyone's married, everyone's happy, everyone's living their best life, and then someone is murdered after a ball hosted at Pemberley, and it's up to the characters of Pride and Prejudice to solve the murder. Now, I will say, I'm about 30 pages in so far. I kind of wanted to give you like a first impression.
I have two things. One thing that I absolutely adore is that I do feel like PD James has really done their best to try and write this as if Jane Austen wrote this. Okay, the language is very similar, it's very stylized, it's very trying to make you feel like you're still in the Austen world, and the way it kind of wraps up things from the previous book in the prologue was really interesting, because it tells you about how Mary married someone almost as boring as she is, and how Lydia is still welcome at home but Wickham isn't, and how Kitty is the only one not married but she's kind of staying at home with her family. So all these different like things are going on, which very much does feel authentic to what the original book was, so it gets bonus points for that. I do feel like of all the ones I'm going to read, this is the one that is going to feel most accurately like a Pride and Prejudice book. However, there is a character in Pride and Prejudice called Colonel Fitzwilliam. Now, Fitzwilliam is Darcy's mother's name, right? So imagine naming your son, his first name is your surname, but okay. Anyway, in Pride and Prejudice, there is a moment where you think that him and Lizzie Bennet might get together. It's blink and you'll miss it type stuff, right? Because essentially she can see that he is all of the good qualities that she wants to see in Darcy, except he very gently tells her it's never gonna fucking happen, because second-borns are not able to choose where they marry, and essentially even if Darcy were to change his mind, which is possible at that point, and obviously she knows this because he's already proposed to her at least once, or it might be just before this that he proposed it the first time, etc. It's like heavily implied there's going to be a proposal. It's not going to be from Colonel Fitzwilliam, but he's a very jovial person, he's a very happy person, and he seems to have that bridge of character between Bingley being a cutie pie and Darcy being very strict and very stubborn, etc. So I was all here for that. I thought actually that was like a really nice balance of a character, and he's so rarely talked about because the two big ones from Pride and Prejudice are Darcy and Wickham, right? But Colonel Fitzwilliam is also a contender to romance Lizzie, except she's a lot more mature by this point. She's not going to be suckered in as quickly, except like there's reasons why she's just not as into him, and I think probably it's because her heart is still set on Wickham at this point, because she doesn't really know what's happened. In Death Comes to Pemberley, he is set up very early doors to be a love rival to a guy called Henry Alston, who is in love with Georgiana. Now, Fitzwilliam and Darcy are obviously both guardians of Georgiana. Georgiana is Darcy's younger sister, and there is a big old age gap, right? Now, that wouldn't necessarily have been an issue of the times. It's certainly an issue for modern readers. It's certainly an issue for me. I say modern readers. Me. It's an issue for me, especially with the whole like Leo stuff that's coming out now, which just goes to show when I'm filming this as opposed to when this is coming out. So I have an issue with that, whereas Henry Alston is more his age and like is seen to me to be a more like substantial love rival. But then they changed the personality of Colonel Fitzwilliam to suit him being that kind of antagonist, and that is my issue. Is he is a very sensible man, he's a very like kind man, and the implication is that because he's been to war he's now an arsehole, and I get it, I understand, and I do understand that that sometimes can be the case, that sometimes men can go to war and not come back the same. Okay, I'm not disputing that. I am disputing the need of it. This is a mystery that is going to be very heavily influenced by the connections that people have. So it's interesting that it's gone so hard in chapter 1 for him to be essentially an antagonist to everyone else. Because I know from having watched the series that Henry Alston is at no point considered one of the people that's involved with the murder, as far as I remember. Why does it matter? Why does it matter that this romance love triangle subplot is here? I just don't think it is. And I think it's really interesting because it kind of shows how Lizzie Bennet is going to deal with shit like that, in that she's not going to get involved. She's not getting involved. She very much, he comes to her and he says, you know, if I were to ask her to marry me, would you stand in the way, essentially? And she's like, well, what does Georgiana want? And it's very heavily implied that he's not asked her. Like, as far as he's concerned, he's happy with the marriage. She seems kind enough to accept him, but he doesn't actually know for sure yet. But Lizzie will support her husband's choice, and he thinks that her husband will just automatically agree, which maybe he will. I don't know. I've got something in my eye. but I just find it really jarring as like an opening plot point setup type thing. And the other thing that felt very kind of on the nose is he asks if the Wickhams are going to be there. Now, again, having seen this before, I know the Wickhams are going to show up. So the fact that Lizzie's like, no, we've not spoken to them in years, they're not welcome here, they know they're not welcome here, it very much feels like almost pantomime-esque, where it's like, no, and they're like, it's behind you. Like, it feels like that. But that could just be because I know the story. As far as writing goes, I definitely think this is going to be one of the more interesting spin-offs, sequels, parodies, I don't know, but I don't know if it's going to be my favourite overall. However, as you can see, I've got vibes today. I've got misty, wintry vibes, which is perfect for reading a mystery, and I'm here for it. So I'm gonna go listen to my audiobook. I do have a bit of work to do, but I am house sitting because this is not my garden. I'm house sitting and dog sitting, so I don't have like a lot of stuff I need to get done, but I do have stuff that I need to get done. So I'm gonna go listen to this, and when I'm about 100 pages in, let's say about 200 pages, because that's about a third from the end, I will catch up with what I'm thinking so far. I do know that I need to get at least 5 chapters done today to be on track for other things that I'm filming this week, but for now I just need to get 5 chapters done, so I'm gonna go do that. Hey, so I just thought I would catch you up. I'm currently on a very nice walk with the dog. As you can see, green as far as the eye can see. I'm 200 pages into Death Comes to Pemberley. Apparently someone else had the same idea about the same walk, bumping into people in the middle of nowhere, don't like it. Anyway, yeah, I'm 200 pages into Death Comes to Pemberley, and more characters are changing to suit the plot, which I don't appreciate. Lizzie has become a very quiet and subdued character, which, if you've read Pride and Prejudice, it's not Lizzie at all. And Darcy, the upside of Darcy is you do actually get to see what he's got going on. I did appreciate that, like it does go some way to explain why he thinks the way he does. The Lizzie thing's really obtuse. I don't see the point in making her this quiet and subdued character. And it does make it feel a bit more misogynistic than it needs to. Because like there's going to be misogyny in the original story, but Jane Austen herself wasn't really a misogynist. She wasn't even misandrist, she didn't hate men. She just thought that all people were idiots. And I do feel like P.D. James is doing his best to separate men and women. And there is an element of, but I'm a feminist, because there's one character that's like, oh, you know, women have minds too. Bobby, this way. There is like an element of that, which is fine, but I don't know, there's just certain parts where I'm like, that didn't need to be here. It is affecting my enjoyment a little bit. I don't think it's going to be a 5 stars, I think it's going to be a 4, but I'm going to core pilot properly and find out. I'm not going to make any snap decisions, but I'm generally not enjoying it as much as I enjoy Pride and Prejudice, I know that for sure. Bobby, this way. Just walking backwards and forwards until he wears himself out. But yeah, so it is one of those things where, yeah, that has impacted it slightly. It is interesting because having watched the TV series, I know who did it and I know why they did it, and there is a lot to kind of set that up in the opening chapters. But I'm, like I said, I'm now 200 into like a 300-page book, and they're doing everything they can to avoid those key elements, which does make me feel like it's very Agatha Christie inspired, where it's like, oh, and by the way, it was there the whole time, but we didn't look back at it, you got to be a super sleuth yourself, kind of, I don't know. So that's the whole thing. But yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I was talking on the live stream yesterday, Bobby! I was talking on the live stream yesterday with people about whether they prefer modern retellings or more classical retellings. And I think the general consensus is that people prefer a modern retelling because it takes the elements of the story they like, but then makes it more accessible for the modern day, which I can completely understand. So it's going to be interesting when it comes to reading those more modern retellings if I do feel the same, because I feel like part of me prefers the more traditional style because it makes me feel like the book made me feel. But there is no book that I enjoy the way I enjoy Pride and Prejudice, except for Sense and Sensibility, which a couple of the retellings are Sense and Sensibility retellings. So I will probably tack that on the end of this vlog, and do a Sense and Sensibility reread and do that one as well. But we'll see. I'm enjoying the fact that because I'm filming this at my own pace and at my leisure, I can kind of just enjoy these books when I want, rather than trying to force it into a week-long thing, because I've started filming 2 other vlogs this week and I already don't care about the books that I've picked up. So I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna make myself a cup of tea, I'm gonna get some more reading done. I'm going to try and wrap up Death Comes to Pemberley for you before I forget. And then the next book I'm going to be picking up after this one is The Other Bennet Sister, which is far more of like a traditional romance historical fiction. So we will see. That apparently is Olivia's favourite. And she's not a fan of Pride and Prejudice anyway, so I'm intrigued to see what made this one so special to her. But in the meantime, my arm is getting cramp, so I'm going to put my phone down and I'll catch up with you in a bit. Okay, I have about 40 pages left of this, but emotionally, I'm done. I am so disappointed in this. This had such a great premise, and considering I was going in with the background of having seen the TV series, I thought I was going to really enjoy this. The way the mystery is wrapped up in the book doesn't even touch the way it's done in the TV series. The TV series does so much more to establish who Lizzie Bennet is in this modern world, who Darcy is in this modern world for them. I say modern world, I mean like 6 years after they've got married, etc. There's all of this stuff going on that should develop their character, but their characters are very much left where they are so that the story can progress, and then when the author is done with the story, they just wrap it up. The way the proceedings work in the TV series worked so much better for me, and I was really disappointed that the way this is done, there is almost no active involvement of Lizzie or her friends, which does happen in the TV series, and that it is kind of all just left to 3 men who aren't even on screen at the time to fix this. And it just, that really bothered me. The way this has still got 40 pages, but we know who did it and why, and this is all just kind of everyone else wrapping up stuff. What was the point? What was the point? The way this was done, I really thought that this would probably be the most honest to the Pride and Prejudice franchise, and it wasn't. So really disappointing. I will core pile it, and when I come to wrapping up all of the books at the end, I'll include the wrap up of core pile in this. But I will be really surprised if this comes out as higher than 3 stars. It really went downhill after my last wrap up, after my last catch up of what's happened around the 200 page mark. And I'm really annoyed. I'm really annoyed because I had really high expectations for this. But it's a TBR vet. So this one will go and a new book will go on my shelf. Like I said in the last catch-up bit, I am going to pick up the other Bennet sister next. But I'm not going to, it's not going to be the next thing that I read. So I will probably be back in Banbury when I start and or finish that one. But just know... very disappointing. Very disappointing. If you're looking for something that feels like Jane Austen, great. If plot doesn't matter to you, fine. But if plot and character does matter to you, this ain't it. And I can now see why so many people get disappointed with this one. Watch the TV series. The TV series is great. The book is trash. It's midnight and I absolutely should be asleep, but I realised that I look great and I want to talk about this book because I am, as you can see, 400 pages into a 600 page book, and I realised I've not updated you about anything. So the other Bennet sister is the one that I said that I would read after Death Comes to Pemberley, and what an incredible turnaround. This is great. I think I love this almost as much as I love Pride and Prejudice. So Mary Bennet, I couldn't stand her in Pride and Prejudice in any of the editions, like films, TV series, etc. This, she's a whole vibe. So in this, Mary Bennet is the last sister to be married. Her mum is a dick, and unfortunately, spoiler alert, her father passes away. It has this real persuasion vibe, where she may or may not be in love with someone that she shouldn't or shouldn't be in love with, and he's lower born than her family aren't really that interested in connecting with him, but she clearly really likes him, and I'm really interested to see if it turns out that he is the guy that she gets together with at the end, or if it's this other guy who's now sprung up who is more appropriate for her. But I really like that she's very much neurodivergent coded. She is very determined in what it is she wants to do. She's just a really charming character, and considering how chunky this book is, because I've been listening to it as an audiobook as I drive to and from everywhere I've been recently, it's been kind of the perfect driving companion. So I think I'm going to finish this tomorrow, which is why I kind of felt like I needed to say something about it now. So I'm really sorry that I have done this book so dirty by not catching you up as and when, so that you can get my thoughts and stuff like that. Because I feel like, and I'm saying this early, I feel like this is going to be my favourite of the retellings, just because I really like that it's adding more to the characters. One thing I will say is, obviously with Death Comes to Pemberley, I said that they vilify one of the characters and it feels like it was on purpose. This is really interesting to me because it vilifies Charlotte. Now, it doesn't make Charlotte the worst person on the planet, but she's not a nice person in this, and she's certainly not nice to Mary, which is really interesting because it looks at the reason why Mary Bennet and Mr. Collins wouldn't work, which for most people, if you've read Pride and Prejudice, you know that it makes sense that Mary would be the best fit for Mr. Collins, and then obviously nothing happens. So it looks at why that happened, and I really like that. I like that it starts in Pride and Prejudice and then carries on, and it's very much Mary's story, but it is influenced by what happened and very much looks at how Mary's actions in the original book and what happens to her in the original book then happens in this sequel retelling, etc. So really enjoying it, really enjoying it. And yeah, considering it's huge, really enjoying it. So I'm now really nervous because I will give my thoughts when I get to the end of this and give you a rating, because I've not wrapped up anything else of it. I'm rubbish at this, I'm so sorry. But I'm really nervous because the one that I want to read after this is Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And the film was kind of boring to me. I just didn't enjoy it very much. And I'm really worried that the jokes just aren't going to land with that one for me. and then I'm going to do Longbourn. So it's going to be a kind of like a serious one, then a not serious one, and then a serious one again. So we shall see. But yes, anyway, I wanted to share some thoughts. This has been an absolute chaotic mess, and I will be so disappointed in myself if this is the only thing I say about the other Bennet sister. But I need to go wash my face and take all of this off because I am hot and sweaty. I have been to a ladies' night this evening and I'm very sleepy. But I wanted to say something before I took this off because I still look cute. But anyway, let me know in the comments down below if you've read this, because genuinely, persuasion, Sense and Sensibility vibes, like, this is an author who understands Jane Austen. To me, like, this is the Jane Austen book I would want to write. So I'll be really surprised. It's nearly made me cry like 8 times as well. So I'll be really surprised if A, I don't cry, and B, it doesn't get 5 stars. Like, it has to really work hard not to get 5 stars from me now. So yeah, I'm enjoying it. Thank you. Jane Austen July is just around the corner and I am really far behind. So I am going to be picking up Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. But before I do, and before I get into any of that and what it's about, etc., I need to introduce you to someone. Hello. Hello. This is Horatio. Now, you will have seen him on all of my socials, but this is the first time he is being recorded for a YouTube video, and he is very sleepy and very needy right now, and I love him. I love him with my whole heart and soul. So, say hello, Horatio. Yeah. Is that you? Okay, cool. So, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I have seen the film. I understand the premise, and essentially this is Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. As far as I'm aware, all that Seth Graham Greene has added to the classic is zombies. I'm about 40 pages in so far, and it is almost word for word the original, but then just random snippets of zombies. That's it so far. I'm not expecting it to be revolutionary. As I've said, I've seen the film, so I do kind of know what the plot twist is going to be. And I am a little worried that this is going to be kind of like Death Comes to Pemberley, where just because there's like this gimmick, it doesn't actually add anything to the narrative. But we shall see. We shall see if it's more entertaining. Wow, T2. Where are you going? You're just going to hang out there? That's where you want to sit? Where are you going? Yeah, so I'm worried that because it's just going to be gimmicky, that's it. I'm going to go read. This little boy is going to settle down for a nap because he is sleepy. And I will see you guys when I've read something. When I hit like the 100-page mark, I'll catch up. Because I forgot to do that with the last one. But I will do that with this one, I promise. Okay, so I headed down to my parents for the weekend because my brother is over, and I decided I would pick up the audiobook for Longbourn on my journey down. I have not, at time of recording, finished Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I'm kind of losing interest in it, just because it is just a roll-up respit of Pride and Prejudice, but with like the odd line about zombies. And like the zombies don't really seem like much of a threat, like it's just kind of this ever-present thing. It's just a bit bizarre. But I want to talk about Longbourn. Now, this is a reread for me. I read this years ago, as this copy was gifted to me by my best friend Yunka, and I love that Yunka always includes a really cute little inscription. Now, Yunka and I are big fans of classical literature. They are still an English teacher. They are a beautiful human being. But I don't know if they were to reread this, they would have the same reaction that I'm having upon rereading it, because I remember it being an interesting dynamic between Sarah and the men in her life, and it being like a love triangle. I don't remember it being so racist. And basically, Sarah is one of the 4 servants serving at Longbourn. So you have Mr. and Mrs. Hill, but Mr. Hill is kind of very sickly and can't really do a whole lot, but he used to be like the main footman and steward. So it's Mrs. Hill, Sarah, Polly, who is this like 12-year-old child who also works there, and James Smith, who is the newest member of the servants team. Now, Sarah is immediately put off by James. There seems to be something going on with him. He's definitely hiding something. He keeps avoiding the militia, like actively avoiding the militia, and he's also got some drama going on, and because it's very close third, we kind of jump from perspective to perspective, so we know that he likes her even though she can't stand him. So there's all that stuff going on. But she also starts having a relationship, or starts being courted by one of the footmen from Netherfield, which is by a young man who essentially is a man of colour, who was a slave of the original Master Bingley, but is now essentially a working man for the current Mr. Bingley that we expect in Pride and Prejudice. And he makes it very clear very early doors that he used to work on the plantation, but he's now a footman for this person, that he was born into slavery, but now is not a slave, but has like family that are slavery, which is why his name is Bingley, because if you're of the estate, you would be given that surname. Now, he hasn't actually done anything wrong. He has pursued someone who is quite clearly interested in him, which is Sarah. She is of age. They've got obviously very similar outlooks on life. She desperately wants to get out of Longbourn and the just general area. She finds it all really tedious and boring, which is interesting anyway, because I find any kind of story where women want to explore something outside of their roles like a positive thing in literature. I really like that. And he very much encourages her to like think about traveling abroad, and he talks about, like I said, like working on this plantation, but he talks about traveling, and he talks about London, and he talks about these things that she's clearly very interested in, and she finds him very interesting. But everyone else finds him really creepy and finds him just so like there's a phrase that Mrs. Hill keeps calling him, and like I said, I'm doing this as an audiobook, so I don't remember specifically what it is she calls him, but I'm terrified that it's a slur. Like, I'm really scared that she's just been straight up calling him a slur, and just kind of, yeah. Mrs. Hill in particular is very nervous around him and doesn't want him in the kitchen, and it gives, oh my god, it's giving me the ick, and it's really putting a dampener on this, because this is one of the ones where I thought I really enjoyed the other Bennet sister. This one, I remember the writing style being very similar, and it is very similar, and it again really feels like it's trying to evoke Pride and Prejudice rather than actually be Pride and Prejudice, and kind of it has spent an awful lot of time at this point in the story. Mr. Collins has only just proposed, so there's obviously still quite a lot of book. It's kind of following the story quite closely, but it's taking its own time and it's at its own pace, which I do respect. But I swear to God, if at the end of this it turns out that this Mr. Bingley, or Ptolemy Bingley, is essentially the Wickham of this story, I will be pissed, because James Smith, because we're seeing behind his eyes and we can see how much he cares about Sarah, we can see that he's quite tormented, we can see that he's quite shy and reserved and very stoic. So we know he's a good guy, and he is immediately wary of this guy. But the only thing about him that would make any of them uncomfortable is that he's a man of colour, and I find that gross. So if that's the case, I'll be really, really upset, and I'll be really disappointed in myself that that's not something I remembered. I've talked to people about this before, where like I've reread things and I've realised that they're racist or misogynist, etc. And it breaks my heart, because I think it's one of those things where that is white privilege that has been blindsiding me this whole time. And I'm just pissed about it. But it's got plenty of time. It may end up going another way. The other Bennet sister did. So maybe it will subvert my expectations of what character role he's fulfilling. And I'll be thrilled if that's the case. But I don't remember. I don't remember much. All I remembered from reading this the first time was that she hated her job, and that it followed the storyline very closely. I'm not entirely convinced I finished it the first time I reread it. And if this pack of post-it notes that I just found on page 360 is anything to go by, I didn't finish it last time. So I'm very sorry, Yunka. I think I told you that I did, but for some reason I just left the last 80 or so pages. So yeah. But I'm hoping to finish this one whilst I'm down this weekend. I think I've got about 4 hours of the audiobook left, because then I've also brought the Heiress with me, which is the last historical retelling of Pride and Prejudice I've got. And then it'll be on to part 2 of this massive vlog, which will be the modern adaptations. And I have 1 month to get those books read, whereas these ones I've taken a good 5.5 months to read. So love that for me. But yeah, so disappointing, but has the potential to subvert. And I'm really hoping, I mean, it could be that actually this is a whole big story about acceptance. There's enough pages that they could bring it round, but it's whether it will or not. But if not, the thing that really concerns me, about the conversations about race is that is a photo of the author. And also the fact that it came out in 2013. So Twilight came out in 2012. Do you remember the nuance around race in that one? It's a year later. Do we think there's going to be much more nuance there? Unlikely. But you never know. My expectations are pretty to the ground. Pretty low to the ground, but we'll see. But anyway, I'm going to continue with this one. I'm going to read for a bit before I go to bed, and I'm going to try and read Zombies. These are the first time I've read 2 Pride and Prejudice books back to back. Usually I give myself at least a couple of weeks to finish one and move on to something else, but I'm just losing interest in the other one, and this one's upsetting me. So if I can get these 2 done nice and quick, hopefully the Heiress will be better. Fingers crossed. But I will catch you up when I've read some more. Okay, I have finally got to the part in Longbourn that I apparently abandoned this book last time. And it wasn't an accident. I know why I abandoned this book at that point. One of the triggers for me that I talk about on my channel quite a bit is that I get triggered by any reference to child abuse or sexual assault in that context. It is because as a teacher, it is something that I had to deal with as safeguarding, and because of stuff that happened when I was like 15. Not to me, but to people around me. Sorry, my cat's being a menace. And it's super triggering for me. Now, the problem is, there is no sexual assault in this, but it is heavily implied that there might be, and certainly towards a child, which I really don't like. They really paint Wickham. Wickham is not a nice guy, right? And I think when we learn that he tried to run away with Georgiana when she was 15 and Lydia when she was 16, we generally read that and go, that's gross, right? And it's not just gross in like our context, but gross in theirs as well. But in this book, he preys on a 13-year-old girl, and it's awful. And I don't know why in my brain those 3 years make all the difference, or if it's just the fact that his assaults as they are off page in the other books, but in this one you literally see him like pinning this girl to a wall or whatever it is, but I'm raging. So when other stuff happens later, like we find out that one of the characters gave a baby up who had essentially the bastard child of Mr. Bennet, I'm like, the fuck is this book? So first we had the racism, now we have other betrayals and sexual, like, predatory behaviour towards children, like, and it's all wrapped up in this really, like, very familiar lyrical writing that is very historical and kind of very much feels like Jane Austen's writing. And I'm like, what the fuck is this shit? And, like, how did I just repress all of this? Like, how did I just not remember? So I'm raging. I'm really angry. And it's not that it's a bad book, it's that I hate that. I don't think the way it's handled any representation thus far is good. I think it's really interesting because I obviously said in the previous clip, I was really worried that the way the racism was handled was just going to be like he was going to be an awful person. He's not come up again since. Like I said, I'm like a full 150 pages away from where I was before. He's just not come up. He moved away and that was it. Sarah even goes to London and doesn't see him. Like, she just doesn't come across anyone else like him. So it's kind of just ignored, I guess, which is just weird to me because it's just not... Again, I feel like I've talked about this before where there's like lamp lighting where you like show a thing like racism or predatory behaviour but you don't actually do anything to say what your opinion on it is. Either way, you just kind of go, well, that's historically accurate, and you're like, that's not enough. So yeah, I've got about 100 pages to go, I think. He was just climbing my leg, but I'm wearing leggings, so you can imagine how much that hurt. Yeah, I've got about 100 pages to go, so I am going to finish it because then I get to put a new arc. I get to know, if I finish it, it's a TBR vet, so I get to move a new book onto my shelf. But, that's my opinion on it. So yeah, I'm gonna go finish this. I got a few more pages into Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, but it's just the same as Pride and Prejudice with the occasional line, and I have no emotional investment in it whatsoever, so I will finish it eventually, but I'm taking my good sweet time. I have my fingers crossed that the Heiress is good, because I will be pissed if it's just not, because I realise I peaked with the other Bennet sister, but I really didn't want to leave that one till last because it was such a chunker. So this has been a really eye-opening vlog. I've enjoyed it. I'm more looking forward to like the second part now where I read the modern adaptations because shit like this shouldn't happen. And also there are quite a few that are by authors of colour. So that is also super important. But yikes. Big yikes. Anyway, I'm going to go read that last 100 pages, call it a fucking day, and I'll catch up with you in a bit. He's literally trying to get in my mouth. Gross. Disgusting. Okay, so I'm not moving anytime soon. So I thought what I would do is just kind of give you a little catch up on where I'm at with Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Now, it's a really interesting retelling because it's almost okay. It's almost verbatim, like word for word, the same thing. So it really. Yes, you're gorgeous. It kind of reads. He's going to attack me in a second. He's luring me in to a full sense of security. There it is. There it is. Yeah, so it kind of reads like a fan fiction because there's a particular type of fan fiction where it's almost like the writer has the chapter of the book they're working from in front of them, and they're like copying it out and they're just changing like one or two things to suit their alternate universe or like the ship that they want, etc. And I don't trust you. I don't trust that you're not going to bite me. He's such a shit. Yeah, so it's one of those things where it reads very much like that. It reads like Seth Graham, I think, is the name of the author. I haven't got the book in front of me, so I can't remember. It reads like he's got the book in front of him and he is just typing it out and then adding these references to zombies. Now, I made a different choice with this one because obviously with Death Comes to Pemberley, I really liked the TV show and I was getting like halfway through and I kind of, don't eat my hair, kind of wanted to pick up the TV show rather than the book because the book was just really upsetting me. And with this book, it wasn't upsetting me, but I wanted to watch the film to kind of see if I remember, like, because I remember enjoying it. Like, is it as good as I remember? It's not. It is not as good as I remember. I really enjoy Lily James as an actress, but I feel like the direction of it was totally wrong. Lizzie Bennet is notoriously a very light-hearted and gentle person, and even as a killer, I feel like she needed that. She needed that levity. She needed the sass, etc. I think I thought he'd fallen asleep then, but he hasn't. And in this, she's very serious and very angry, and it doesn't work because that is what Darcy is. And it's not that they're meant to be grumpy sunshine, but it's meant to be that they have stuff in common outside of their demeanors, and that he brings a level of seriousness to her life that she needs, and she brings a level of levity to his and like kind of silliness and joy, and they balance each other out because they are perfectly suited for each other for this variety of reasons. So I kind of didn't like that. I remember really enjoying Matt Smith. Matt Smith is amazing in that. I mean, Matt Smith's amazing anyway. And I can't remember the actor's name, but I also really enjoyed Darcy. I thought he was very funny. Like, he had some really great one-liners. Like, there's a whole bit where he talks about the strength of her arms and how she's still feminine, even though she's got these strong arms, and that really tickled me. But the book itself is just a little too close to the original, but not good enough. I don't know. It's very bizarre. So I'm hoping to finish that very soon so I can just kind of move on to the next one because I'm losing the will to live with it a little bit. But I do kind of want to see if they follow the same storyline as the film, because I feel like the film adds a lot of new stuff with the politics of the zombies and how Wickham is involved, and I don't know if that is true to the book. So that intrigue is the only thing kind of maintaining my interest. So we shall see. He has fully just conked out. He's unconscious now. That's it. Yeah, so that's my plan for today, is to read and or finish that. And kind of wrap that up as soon as possible. Oh, hello. Good morning. Yeah, so that's kind of my plan for today. I have no other plans. I have work I need to do, obviously, because I always do. But it's not a lot that I need to get done today. So after that, it will be reading Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And maybe, if we're really lucky, I can finish it. But anyway, I'm going to go and try and get some work done. It's not going to be easy, because it's going to imply only using the one hand, because this one is holding a baby. This one's occupied, and I'm not putting him down for love nor money. It's not happening. Not unless he bites me again, but I think we're safe for now. But yeah, that's where I'm at with Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I am tempted because obviously part of this was to then do the sequels, and I think Sense and Sensibility has a Kraken in it. I think it's Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters. I can't remember, but I might do that one as just like a really quick audiobook. We shall see. But anyway, I'm going to go do some stuff, I'll catch up with you in a bit. So I have finally started the Heiress, which is the last of the historical retellings, and I am about 120 pages in. I'm on part 2, and what's really interesting is this does a very similar thing to what the other Bennet sister does, which is essentially race through the Pride and Prejudice part so that it can get to the character's main story. But what I'm struggling with is because it has rushed through in the way it has, it doesn't have the same emotional draw as the other Bennet sister. Even though Mary was never my favourite character, I could at least empathise with her in her own story. In this one, Anderberg is a sickly child. She quite clearly has colic as a baby, which I don't know much about because I've never had kids, but I know it makes them cry a lot and there's not really a lot you can do about it. But essentially, Catherine de Bourgh pays for a doctor, and the doctor prescribes laudanum. And as a child, she doesn't know what that is, but as an adult and a reader, I do know what that is, and I know that it was a medication given to basically anyone at any stage, and much like heroin, was incredibly addictive. And it was essentially a sedative that was used for hundreds of years. I don't know if it's still used, I hope not, but I think it is where a lot of our like sedatives and painkillers come from, is the science of laudanum. And I'm realising now that that's probably what this bottle is. So basically she is prescribed laudanum as a baby, and throughout her entire childhood she is given it every single day, and she is addicted to it. At one point her dad tries to try and find a different cure for whatever her sickness was, because they don't know what it was. Sometimes it sounds like she has asthma, in the way that she describes really struggling to breathe. And sorry, my cat is now playing with a bin bag. And then other times it sounds like she might have some kind of mental illness or psychosis. She can hear things in the walls, she talks to people who aren't there, and it's a really like interesting take on that, because I don't know if that is a side effect of the laudanum or if that's something that she is struggling with that they're trying to suppress with the laudanum. So that's like a really interesting thing. It's almost disability rep in the way that she is treated, and the way that she does nothing for themselves. And there are a few characters who try and encourage her to do stuff for herself, and she almost willfully doesn't want to, and that's quite interesting. But the writing style I'm really struggling with. Now I am in the process of decluttering my room, which is why I look really hot and sweaty, and I'm listening to it as an audiobook so that I can get through it quicker, because the next step is editing this monstrosity, and I'm really nervous about doing that. So yeah, once I finish this, I'll be editing the whole thing and then starting the modern retellings, which I think will go a lot quicker. But anyway, the writing style of this is very telling, and it's very much Anderberg kind of standing there and just discussing everyone around her, rather than allowing us a moment to observe and to kind of take in those things. She's very cutting towards Darcy and very cutting towards Lizzie, and basically makes out that Lizzie just scorned her because she's not fit and healthy, and Lizzie is fit and healthy, which is not my interpretation of Lizzie Bennet, and I found that kind of jarring. And it also makes out that whilst Darcy is attractive, he isn't a very nice person, which again is not my interpretation of it, and I'm struggling with that a little bit because I love the original so much. But for the most part it's just kind of fine, and it reminds me very much, the way it's very placidly moving through things is very similar to Longbourn, and I feel like Longbourn and the Heiress have the same target audience, whereas Pride and Prejudice and the other Bennet sister have a different target audience, and actually I'm more in that category than I am with this one, which does make it a disappointment that it's the last book I'm going with. But I did that to myself because I didn't want to leave the other Bennet sister till last, knowing that I would leave it till the last minute with the last book, and I really have. It's a few days until July, and I want this to go up on the 1st so that it can be for Jane Austen July. So on my own head be it that I'm ending with such a disappointing book. It hasn't, I don't know if you can call a book disappointing when you're only 100 pages in, but it's going to take some work to actually get to a place where I care about these characters again. I think what Anderberg is going through is interesting, but I don't find her interesting, and that's really jarring. If she finds a way to kind of combat that, maybe get off laudanum, maybe take some control of her own life, and then there's some conflict arising there, that'll be interesting. But if it's just a to and fro of her mum and her, that will be tedious for me. If there's an element of romance, I will not mind it, but I will also not mind if there isn't, because I think it's very easy to fall into those traps when you're doing a Pride and Prejudice retelling. Yes, baby. He's like, I wish to be up. Oh, you're so gorgeous. I think it's very easy, because it's a Pride and Prejudice retelling, to tick those boxes. I don't know if it's always necessary. I feel like some of the romances that have been in some of the other retellings were a bit flat. Like Longbourn's one, for example, was really disappointing. It was just like, go this side, go this side. It was a really shallow romance, very much a romance of convenience more than anything else. So didn't like that. Also didn't like the racist implications of that one either. But yeah, so I don't know. But it's not one that I'm rushing to recommend. And when it comes to the ranking at the end of this video, it's not going to sit very high. I'd be very surprised if it sits very high. But as I said, I'm only 100 pages in, so when I get to the 200 page mark, I will catch you up again. I imagine it will be later on today, hopefully once the decluttering has been decluttered and I've moved on to whatever chore I'm doing next whilst listening to the audiobook. But I will catch up with you then.
You're being a menace. Are you being a menace? Okay, so I did hit the 200 page mark yesterday, but I was very hot and very sweaty and I didn't want to catch up on vlog, so I just left it there and decided I would come back to it today because I have the house to myself, so I can enjoy an audiobook, which is how I'm going to finish this, and also play Sims at the same time, which is how I want to spend my evening. And I'd said that there would need to be something radically interesting about Anne Berg for me to stay interested, and what Molly Greeley has gone for is to make them LGBT. Now, it is not clear, it is very much subtext at the moment at the 209 page, that she is in love with Miss Heiress, who is just another lady from the city who comes from a middle aristocracy background. They are not as rich as Anne Berg is, and I'm really interested to see if it does decide to lean into like a modern Bridgerton style thing, where if people are in love, they're in love and it's not seen as like a big deal, or if they're going to keep it very traditional Jane Austen and Jane Austen era and make a big deal out of it. And my issue with people that do the traditionalist stuff is that I'm not interested in that. I think we live in a society now where we should be more accepting of those things. So it's not necessarily about rewriting history, but if it's fiction, why can't it be rewritten? Is kind of where I stand on it. So if they don't get their happily ever after, I'll be very disappointed. But I've got about 150 pages to go, because it is just a little bit over 400, a little bit over 340 pages in total, so about 150 pages to go. And then I'm done. And then I'm done with all of the historical retellings of Pride and Prejudice, and I will do my ranking probably this evening, and then I will start editing this video before I start reading the modern adaptations, which I'm really excited for, but I will probably be reading in July, which I was kind of hoping I would have got to and have that video edited as well by the time we got to here, but I procrastinated and I only have myself to blame. So I shall procrastinate no longer. I'm going to go and finish this one, give it a score, and then I will rank the historical retellings for you. So I will see you in a bit when I'm prepped to do that. Okay, so I finished the Heiress last night and then proceeded to do very little. Didn't wrap up. I just wasn't in the mood. I was overall really disappointed in this. It left quite a bad taste in my mouth in general. And I'm just gonna kind of like, rather than think about what I've said already, I'm just gonna kind of generally recap the issues that I had with the Heiress in particular. So it is quite clear early doors that this young girl is being drugged up, basically, and sedated with laudanum to kind of control her. Not necessarily because her behaviour is bad or they're worried, but because it's just easier than dealing with the fact that she might be a sickly child, which Catherine de Bourgh just doesn't want to do. Catherine de Bourgh is probably the most honest representation of any of the characters that are originally in Pride and Prejudice, in that she is a control freak, she's opinionated, and she's not used to people having opinions against her. Now, as Anne de Bourgh grows up, she obviously gets herself off laudanum, but because laudanum is, as we know it today, essentially heroin, the way she just gets over this drug addiction, she just like casually thinks about it every now and then she just kind of thinks, oh, my life would be so much easier if I did this, but there's no real access to
what drug dependency would have been like. It's very sanitized. And then equally, she has this lesbian relationship with someone, which again is very sanitized and very gently, I've picked up a bit of plastic out of nowhere, I'm just fidgeting now, like very sanitized and very gently done. And when that doesn't end well, again, very gently done. And I just felt like there were so many opportunities, if you were going to go the traditional route, to really give this book stakes, because these are real life things that people deal with. But it's so gently done. Like, even Pride and Prejudice has stakes in it. Even Pride and Prejudice has the ability to make you fear for certain characters, like that their reputations are going to be ruined. But every time that something could go wrong in this book, a page later it's kind of fixed. So she gets really sick because she goes in the sea, and actually it cleanses her of the laudanum. But then she's back on the laudanum and she's fine. Buddy, yeah. I know, I didn't pay attention to you for a whole 5 seconds. She has this relationship, but it doesn't go anywhere. And it kind of has, okay, this is a spoiler. It kind of has a kind of Evelyn Hugo vibe to it, in the fact that, what about that? Do you want that? There we go. It has this like Evelyn Hugo vibe to it, in the fact that she has this relationship, but then like there's like a hidden element to it, and they're trying to pretend it's not a relationship. But again, it's done with so little tact and care. There's a part where this guy seems to be threatening her and is kind of like coercing her into marrying him, except that's not his intention at all. He's actually a really nice guy. She's just found him really insidious this entire time, and he literally hasn't done anything wrong. Like, he hasn't done anything wrong. She's just not attracted to men, so she finds him insidious. And that I find problematic as well, because, like, don't get me wrong, men are trash, but I do feel like painting every sapphic character as someone who hates men, that gives me the ick, because I don't know, and maybe it's true, I don't know, I'm not sapphic, I don't know, but I do feel like just because you're not attracted to someone doesn't mean you don't immediately hate them or find their behaviour insidious. Like, he's done nothing wrong except show her an interest she has no interest in reciprocating, but he's not disrespectful. He basically tells her that he has seen her liaising with this other person, and that he can protect her with this marriage, is essentially what he says. And she says no, because she doesn't want to give him her home, basically, or her estate. Which I can totally understand. I can understand that rationale of not giving it up, because she is a woman of wealthy standing. She doesn't need a husband, which was incredibly rare in that era. Would have loved to have seen more of her using that. Except she doesn't. She kind of like gives it to Lizzie and Darcy's kid, which makes no fucking sense in this book, because Darcy basically makes a comment that she is like a doll and that talking to her is really hard because she's drugged up, right? Like, she is sedated, but she takes it very personally, and he doesn't know how to deal with her. So, like, he's literally a child when he says this, but it's fine. Even though her cousin George, who's been so much nicer to her, he doesn't have any children, rather than kind of tie her estate to him, he is older than her, but like him or someone from his wife's family who have like taken her in and cared for her, she's given it to baby George, who is named after the cousin, because he is a second-born son and has no estate of his own, but is Lizzie Bennet and Darcy's child. And it felt like that was really tacked on because they're the main characters of Pride and Prejudice, and not because they actually had any involvement in this book. They have so little to bring to this story. And that's not a problem, but don't just throw it in there at the end. And I don't know, again, like, I found it really frustrating. And I think I kept waiting for it to have more in it. And then it just didn't. It was really passive. Really passive, and I am not a passive bee. So that's it. That's all 5 of the historical retellings done. It has taken me 6 months to get through them all, just because I've read like 60 other books, to be fair, but I now have to read 5 modern retellings in like a week or 2, because that's the time frame that I've left myself. So good for me. So I'm going to quickly wrap up, and then wrap up this vlog, and it'll be out soon. I mean, I say it's out soon. you're watching it now, so it's out. I'm going to wrap up the books now, and I'm going to start with the worst to the best, and I think you can kind of guess which one the best is going to be, but we'll pretend it's a surprise. So the worst one was Death Comes to Pemberley. This was the book that out of all of them I hated the most. It was incredibly misogynistic. Lizzie Bennet is hardly ever in it. Everything is solved off the page, and it was just boring and problematic. Didn't enjoy that. So that one came 5th. 4th is Longbourn, which I'm really, really disappointed about. I do feel like this has probably come down in the rankings purely because I remember really enjoying it. So the fact that it didn't live up to my second reread devastated me. I found the racism so fucking problematic, and the actual romance in it a waste of fucking time. So didn't enjoy that one. I'm actually torn for 3rd because I feel like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies is essentially just a fan fiction. So I felt like a waste of time, but then the Heiress was so passive that it also felt like a waste of time. Like of all the ones that I've read, I am probably not going to recommend any of these. The Heiress is probably the closest of these that I would recommend if that's something that you're interested in, probably because it is the only sapphic retelling of Pride and Prejudice that I've seen thus far. This one, okay, in that case, this one comes 3rd, this one comes 2nd, but barely, and only because, good work, bud. And only because there's 5 books. The only book from this entire vlog that I would happily recommend that isn't the original Pride and Prejudice, because obviously I'd recommend that, it's a great time, is The Other Bennet Sister, which is why I'm devastated that this is the one that has the coffee stain, and also devastated that it's the one that I vlogged the least, just because I read it whilst I was driving quite a bit, and it is the chunkiest. This one is over 600 pages, but I think it is the only one that really captures the things that I love about Pride and Prejudice, which is the family dynamics, the drama, the very kind of, I was gonna say Bildungsroman, and then I was like, is anyone gonna be the fucking nerd? The life journey, essentially, of the main character, seeing how they change to meet the expectations of their partner without actually changing themselves out, like specifically for that, but for themselves. That wasn't really a sentence, but generally I thought this one really captured the era, it captured the romance of Jane Austen. I thought the writing style was really beautiful, and yes, of the 5, this is the one that I will happily recommend. So with that in mind, there will be a link down below so that you can pick this one up from Waypoint Books, which helps to support me and my content. So that's it, vlog done. Now just the trauma of editing it. There will be a part 2. It will be up in July, I promise. I swear to you, it will be up in July. But it will either be the week after this vlog goes up or the week after that, because I'm also going on holiday and I want to do a Spanish vlog because I'm going on holiday with my family and I thought that'd be fun. So anyway, like and subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment down below. Are there any historical set Pride and Prejudice retellings that I didn't get my hands on? Because I think I would like to do something like this again, especially if I can do it over 6 months and not worry that I'm picking up other things in between, because my attention span, she be short. But yeah, so leave a comment like that down below. Or if you just want to let me know you were here, feel free to leave a little red book. Other than that, I hope you have a nice day and I'll see you next time.